One Step Ahead by Lundquist and Beslick.
One Step Ahead Radio. James is, as always, here with me today. A lot of interesting updates around the world. James, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Sasha. Good to be back and speaking with you again. Another week, another interesting set of news and topics, and the world is turning ever onwards, so good to catch up, and always a good appointment to just try and distill and see what to make of where the world's been going, or where the world is going this week.
Yeah, and there are plenty of different things happening in the world. Maybe we can start with this heat-related thing. Apparently, sure. I mean, obviously, and we had just a short chat before. It's very hot in Italy as well today, and I'm in Tokyo in Japan, and it's getting very warm here. And obviously, I mean, these signals, I mean, I don't know if these are anomalies anymore. It's more like the world or the climate or the planet is sending us signals that things are not as they should be. I mean, if you look at some of the reporting around the world, in India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, the temperatures are as high today as they are sometimes late in the summer. And the parts of India have already around 44 degrees Celsius. I mean, it is becoming a bit crazy, isn't it, James?
Yes, it is becoming crazy. And it's, I mean, well, crazy in a certain way. You know, it's all kind of predictable and predicted. And so it shouldn't really strike us. But I think what, is interesting is the human impact. Of these things that has a different kind of effect on it. It's not just dry, not statistics, but dry, scientific evidence and forecasts and models. But it's actually something where you see the effect on people. And sort of famously, I was reminded you talk about the Indian subcontinent as being, one of the key places where this is played out. And of course, Kim Stanley Robinson, when he wrote his famous science faction book about, climate breakdown, the opening of the book is about a heat wave in that part of the world. And so, he was already keenly focused on that geography as being somewhere that's extremely exposed to these very high temperatures that imperil human life and well-being. So it's
but it's in the midst of what's going on in other parts of the world, political sort of I don't know how to call it, a farce in some places around the world, but also the war in Ukraine and conflicts in Israel and all of these other things and potential other things. People are sort of not really, I think, thinking too much about this sort of a silent panic that is growing around the world. I mean, you have 1.9 billion people in Southeast Asia that are affected by this. And I can feel it very often when I'm in Japan that it is, heat is almost unbearable. And I'm thinking about all the people that have to work outside. And many of the people in this part of the world are actually working outside. How are they going to cope with this? And, according to the studies that have been done, compared to pre-1986 level, the temperature in this part of the world has increased to up to 4 Celsius degrees. It's quite a lot. Don't you think so?
Absolutely. And every year that people say, oh, isn't it dry, isn't it hot? And I say, well, it's probably going to be the coolest year of the next 50 years, rather than doing the maths looking backwards and saying, well, it's the hottest year of the last 50 years or 30 years or whatever. It's actually going to be the coolest or the wettest year of the next 30, just to give us a sense of, we ain't seen nothing yet.
No.
So, and I always keep on wondering, when's that going to filter through to people? You can understand that I keep touch on the UK situation and politics there, and this whole discussion that's kind of brewing. Is net zero the new Brexit? The way the newspapers kind of headline it as being the political discussion of saying, well, sort of this is the next thing we have to blast against as, an imposition on freedom and rights and to do what we want to do. But underneath there's like a very compelling and important environmental and human situation that's developing that we can't ignore. So you wonder when it's going to be actually taken up as, when it's going to be that sort of penny's going to drop so widely because of some kind of extreme human suffering event, going back to the Kim Stanley Robinson novel. So, I don't seem to see it on the horizon. I don't know what you think.
No, I mean, I have difficulties to see. I mean, you don't see the political sort of reactions around the world. The UN is quiet. Nothing is really happening. There are no hands being raised on this particular topic. And I mean, the question is also what we're going to do about it. So, yes, we need a better insulated housing, materials that prevent energy loss. We need new architectural design to cope with this, that promote cooling without use of electricity and all of these things, which sort of prompts me to take up another topic, which is interesting from that perspective, not only from that perspective, but also in relation to what has happened in Spain recently with this blackout that happened a couple of days ago. And there is, I would say, emerging and what they call the least sexy, if I can use the expression, area of renewable energy, which is the energy storage. And apparently, when it comes to energy storage, it's China and South Korea that are battling around how to provide solutions for this. And looking at some numbers, I mean, in terms of also the new administration in the U.S. and what they're trying to do, it's very interesting to note that basically the Chinese batteries account for nearly 90% of global capacity for energy storage systems, ESS, including a market share of more than 80% in the U.S. and more than 75% in Europe. So my question is, I'm thinking as a human being sometimes, not only as an investor, sort of how the numbers don't really add up for the U.S. in this context, because they will need, as Europe will need, the battery storage solutions. And I don't think it's far in the future to foresee that, the buildings, commercial and residential buildings, will offer tenants battery storage solutions because, there will be many things happening in the future. What's your take on it?
And because it'll make sense economically.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen the dramatic reduction over the last 15 years in the cost of solar plants, right? And solar technologies and the improvement in efficiency and conversion rates of that. And the same is happening in batteries. And the same is happening in car batteries and charging speeds. We've talked about that in the last few weeks about steps in innovation and new materials that are being developed. Above all, again, we're talking about China, North Korea, South Korea, sorry.
Yeah.
And these dominant players, and with BESS, battery energy storage systems, it's going to be the same, and it's going to get to a point where, it'll be done because it makes economic sense, because it's cheaper and more efficient to have houses and buildings managed like that. And also for the network, talking about, it's not so much a connection to the Spanish blackout specifically, but to have those kind of balancing grid scale battery systems is going to become a fact of life. So it's interesting, as you say, the sort of the trade and the geopolitics that's behind that, because the players who are ahead of this now, it's going to be very difficult to catch up and to develop domestic or European or US supply chains in that. So the whole Trump tariff thing has a huge ramifications for the energy transition in terms of what's going to happen, dislocating supply chains that's going to be very difficult to organize differently and onshore and reshore.
I mean, even the semi-god working on this planet, Mr. Elon Musk, basically told its shareholders in the market that on the last call that ESS was growing like a wildfire, which is very interesting because Tesla still relies on these other battery makers, principally China's CATL,
Yep.
to supply basically cells for its products because of the persistent problem scaling up production of its own in-house 4680 batteries. So it's interesting, from this new American administration policy, back to reality. How does that? What kind of impact will that have on reality? Not for the world, actually, of course, for the world, but for the U.S. itself. So it's going to be interesting to follow.
And
but
it perhaps also connects to the whole AI development as well, as being, a huge motor of, apparently a huge motor of energy demand going forward, or maybe not. Again, in the battles between the U.S. and China, again, it's going to be another key element within the energy transition of how they're going to, how we're going to meet that energy demand and how that's going to be resolved technologically. So again, interesting comments again about that in the last few days.
But I read this latest research or report done by International Energy Agency, basically stating that the need for energy in the next 5 years will be quite significantly higher than it is today due to the artificial intelligence. So, it's a one-way road, more or less, on this. AI will, develop much faster, I think, than people anticipate, but it will also demand another type of energy. So that leads me to another sort of observation. This week, I read in Wall Street Journal that Trump administration is dismissing researchers working on the climate, and this is pretty much related to researchers that are working on the climate change report, which is related to U.S. national determination goals in relation to climate change. And in the same way, another observation, that has been a new study basically published in Nature, which is a scientific study, why people, or how many people, are actually really keen on and expecting politicians and businesses to take care of climate change, and it amounts up to 80+%. James, on one hand, this is a global research. You have about 80+% of people that have been asked that they expect this to happen. Politicians and businesses take more responsibility. On the other hand, you have this new administration, which is, in a sense, inspiring a lot of other administrations around the world who are not really prone to take actions. Why is this happening? I know it's a tough question, but what do you think? There's no consistency in this.
And it's also very difficult because, global climate negotiations and agreements, require very, very broad consensus, and the whole COP process has been built around everybody being in agreement, right? So you have to get everybody in a room once a year and sit them down and haggle and argue until everybody at least agrees on something. So again, what you were mentioning before about the reduction and the termination of staff in the US, and termination of activities and programs related to climate and the environment is going to impact heavily the role, or whatever role, the US is going to play in the upcoming COP in Brazil at the end of the year. So it's going to be interesting to see what kind of progress can be made, or whether at some point, there's going to be a tendency to break out into more regional groups, or there's going to be some kind of different organization, different kind of structure to these talks and to these agreements, cutting out countries or regions that aren't on board. It seems very difficult to do when global warming is a global phenomenon. 1 ton of CO2 is the same everywhere in the world. So
it's physics and chemistry, it's very simple to actually, not so complex to explain. But apparently politicians can jiggle around with these kind of things and really not do and create the environment where people can feel comfortable, or not comfortable, actually more safe, that they will actually tackle this. It's a complete dissonance between, I think, what is the public opinion or expectation and what politicians are trying to deliver. I think this will have a long-term consequences in political terms for many years to come. And I think my personal opinion is that we'll see more and more different kinds of oppressive things around the world, actually in relation to consequences of climate change. They're yet to come in a scale, but unfortunately I think they will. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. But do you think, from an investor perspective, do you think, sort of investors are going to keep on plugging away with kind of climate change and net zero as a kind of a fundamental element within their investment strategies? Because that's kind of one of the things that's holding up the economic argument as well when it comes to the role of business. You have these big asset owners, pension funds, and we've seen standing up again around this issue of saying, no, we believe, these are the people with some of the longest term horizon perspectives in the financial world who aren't going to be swayed by what's happening this year or next year. They're thinking about, how to manage their assets for years and years to come. How are they going to, how do you see them kind of lining up around this as politics goes through its cycles?
Any sane long-term investor which sort of tries to understand the level playing field of the world going forward has, to a certain level, and I think many of them have done that even deeper, integrated this view that physical and transitional consequences of climate change will have material financial impact on the performance of the companies they are investing in. And of course there are various angles how they deploy this insight in the way how they invest. But there's another sort of a interesting insight for many people is that, this entire backlash, so-called backlash for what I call the so-called wokeness of ESG and sustainability investment in the US is a bit of a farce, because if you look at numbers, the ESG and sustainability investments were actually never big in the US. The European Union stands for basically 90% of this assets that have been allocated in these strategies. And my anticipation, looking at what's going on in Europe, yes, of course, due to this very sort of a cunning way of how U.S. administration is panicking around the world with ESG, on ESG and sustainability, the many investors around the world are asking them questions, and there have been significant outflows from these kind of investments, and mainly due to the performance reasons, because half of these funds have been underperforming, and so have also many mainstream funds. So it's not really about the ESG, it's the way how they are constructed, managed and invested. But what's interesting is that there's a canary in the mine, sort of the part of the financial industry which has been screaming, I would say, although these screams have not been perceived as screams, which is insurance industry. And, insurance industry has been coming back over and over again saying that we have a problem and we don't see how we can solve this on our own. It needs to be dealt with on a sector level. Things need to happen faster, at more scale. We need more investments in solutions and so on. So eventually, I think there will be a big rift between the U.S. For next coming probably 4 years, maybe even longer, and European Union, and I think also big parts of Southeast Asia, because if you compare to the view of Southeast Asian sovereign wealth funds and also the biggest one in Japan, they are continuing to support these kind of investments and actually allocating more assets into it because of the fact that they are affected by it. They understand that this is something they can lead to create solutions, more long-term solutions for not only for better performance, but also for the fact to protect the assets from the losses that are anticipated to come in the next 5 to 10 years due to this. So it's not about being sustainable in many ways, because you can believe in that or not. It's not about the virtue in that context. It's more about the real value you can create. And real value is to protect your assets. So I think, as a long answer to your question, but I think it's, we should stop thinking for the time being about what's going on in the US, because it is unpredictable. It's going to be unpredictable. It doesn't make sense. It's not logical. But what's happening, the fight for sustainability, ESG investments, next phase is actually in Europe, not in the US. So let's hope that European Union continues doing what they're doing and actually improve and even increase the focus in this area.
That's very good. I'm glad also you picked out I hadn't mentioned it before, the issue of insurance, because the last few weeks, I think it was the beginning of this month, interesting comments coming from Allianz and board member Gunther Tallinger talking about, exactly that, what you're talking about, the impact of climate change on assets and insurance, and making very strong comments about saying, where we started this conversation, global heating is going to have catastrophic impacts that is going to impact people, but also business and our homes and our cities. So again, I think one thing that if listeners want to go back and read some interesting comments, that's certainly something that stands out for me in the last few weeks as a very authoritative and a very business-minded view of where we're going, rather than the noise that's surrounding us so much at the moment.
I looked at that. Thanks, James, for bringing that up. I looked at that comment from that CEO, and it's sort of a drown in all of the other nonsense coming out from the U.S. new administration and what's going on. I mean, it's a very serious warning, I would say, from one of the biggest insurance companies in the world. About what the state of the world is in this context. So, James, thank you very much for reflection this week. We will continue next week with the new insights, new stories around the world. Can bring you some interesting views and also opinions about what we see is happening. Please share this with your friends, family, and whoever you think should be part of the One Step Ahead community. Thank you very much for listening, and have a great week and weekend.
Yes, thanks, Sasha. Thanks to everybody for joining, and look forward to connecting again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.